Hoover Dam still looks like a monument. The concrete face still rises clean and massive out of the Colorado River. The tours still run. The power still flows. But inside the plant, 3 turbines just moved to the top of a $52 million emergency work list. And that funding shift already tells you the system is changing underneath. Hoover Dam is no longer operating as the high-pressure hydropower fortress the West assumes it is. It is now a machine losing the crushing water weight it was built to depend on. And 52 million people across the Southwest depend on the electricity and water management functions that machine provides. That one funding decision already tells you the engineers are preparing for a dam that can no longer count on Lake Mead staying high enough to support the turbine fleet it was born with. By the end of this case file, you will understand exactly how those 52 million people get cut off. Not through a sudden catastrophic failure, but through a quiet mechanical mismatch between old turbine geometry and a lake that no longer delivers the hydraulic pressure those machines need to survive. And why the surface gives you no warning before the internal destruction begins. We view Hoover Dam as an engineering monument, a Depression-era triumph that turned the Colorado River into reliable power and water for the entire Southwest. But, through a forensic lens, Hoover Dam is not a stable fortress anymore. It is a machine built for one hydrological reality, now operating inside a completely different one. And the gap between those two realities is eating the turbines from the inside out. The first visible clue is the funding itself. In May of 2026, the Bureau of Reclamation announced that about $52 million from the Hoover Dam Post-Retirement Benefit Fund would be invested in infrastructure, operations, and maintenance, including replacement of up to 3 older units with wide-head turbines designed to operate at lower lake elevations. That funding source is diagnostic. The money is not coming from standard federal tax appropriations for routine upkeep. It is coming from an internal reserve fund, and it is being spent not to preserve the dam as a historic landmark, but to prevent hydraulic failure inside the plant. The spending priority has shifted from maintaining peak capacity to preserving partial function. Wide-head turbines are not an upgrade. They are an adaptation. The concept they represent is hydraulic decline, and hydraulic decline is not about running out of water. It is about losing the crushing vertical weight of water pressing down on the turbines. Every foot Lake Mead drops removes millions of tons of pressure from the system. That pressure is what drives the turbines efficiently. When it falls, the turbines enter a failure zone where the physics of moving water stops working the way the original design assumed it would. Look at the threshold. When Lake Mead drops toward 1,035 feet above sea level, Hoover Dam enters a critical mechanical emergency zone. That elevation is dangerously close to the minimum power pool, the absolute lowest level at which the dam can generate electricity at all. But the emergency begins before the lake reaches that floor. It begins when the pressure drops low enough that the turbines designed for high head conditions start to cavitate. Cavitation is the process that turns low water pressure into a machine-eating force. When hydraulic pressure falls, vapor bubbles form in the low-pressure zones around the turbine blades. Those bubbles collapse instantly when they hit higher pressure water downstream. And the collapse is violent. It generates shock waves that pit and erode solid steel. The bubbles are microscopic, but they collapse thousands of times per second, and the cumulative damage destroys turbine runners in a matter of months. Pitted blades force long, costly shutdowns. Crews have to weld material back onto the damaged surfaces and machine them smooth again. The process is slow, expensive, and temporary. If the hydraulic conditions do not improve, the cavitation returns as soon as the turbine goes back online. The visible symptom here is not something you can see from the dam's observation deck. It is something engineers see in vibration data, efficiency curves, and inspection reports. But the mechanism is already active. The original turbine fleet at Hoover Dam was designed in the 1930s for a reservoir system that kept Lake Mead near its maximum elevation of 1,229 feet. At that elevation, the turbines operated in their design sweet spot. The water pressure was high. The flow was smooth. The blades caught the water efficiently and converted hydraulic energy into electrical power with minimal losses. But that system no longer exists. Lake Mead has not been full in decades. The reservoir now fluctuates between emergency thresholds and temporary recoveries, and the turbines are spending more and more time operating outside their design range. That creates a mechanical mismatch. The turbine geometry that worked brilliantly at high elevations becomes a liability at low elevations. The blades are shaped to catch water falling under high pressure. When the pressure drops, the flow becomes turbulent. The blades no longer guide the water cleanly. Eddies form. Vapor bubbles appear. Cavitation begins. And the harder part is that operators cannot simply back off the load to avoid the damage. The grid still needs the power. The Southwest still depends on Hoover Dam to provide baseline electricity during peak demand. So the turbines keep running, even as the hydraulic conditions slowly destroy them. That is where the $52 million investment becomes the most revealing part of the case file. The money is being spent to install wide head turbines, a fundamentally different machine designed to survive low-pressure conditions. Wide head turbines have blade geometries that can catch water efficiently, even when gravity provides less help. They sacrifice peak efficiency at high elevations to guarantee survival and partial function at low elevations. The decision to install them is a forensic confession. It tells you the engineers no longer expect Lake Mead to recover to the elevations that would make the old turbines viable again. The West is no longer investing to maintain historic capacity inside a stable reservoir. It is investing to preserve partial function inside a reservoir system that no longer supports the same turbine fleet it once did. Now look at the work list itself. The immediate priority is replacing up to 3 of the oldest, most vulnerable units. Not all 17, not even half. 3. That number is diagnostic too. It shows a triage approach. The goal is not to restore Hoover Dam to its legendary maximum output. The goal is to keep enough turbines online to maintain grid stability during the next low water cycle. The dam is being redesigned from the inside out to live with scarcity rather than defy it. This creates a reinforcing failure loop. As Lake Mead drops, the old turbines become less efficient and more vulnerable to cavitation. To avoid catastrophic damage, operators reduce the load or inject air into the flow to suppress bubble formation. Both strategies cut into power output. Lower output means less revenue. Less revenue makes it harder to fund the next round of upgrades. Meanwhile, the hydraulic conditions continue to decline, accelerating the wear on the remaining old units. The system is not collapsing suddenly. It is degrading incrementally, one turbine at a time, one efficiency loss at a time, one funding cycle at a time. And the most advanced form of the problem is that it remains invisible from the surface. Hoover Dam still looks like Hoover Dam. The concrete is intact. The spillways are functional. The tours still run. Visitors still stand on the observation deck and marvel at the scale of the structure. But inside the plant, the machine is being quietly rebuilt to operate in a world where the lake that feeds it no longer behaves the way it did when the dam was designed. The visible calm hides the mechanical emergency. What looks like continuity is really adaptation under duress. The gap between the dam's nameplate identity and its real low-water performance is widening every year. Nameplate capacity is the official power rating printed on the dam, the number that appears in grid planning documents and historical records. It represents what the dam can produce under ideal conditions. But those conditions no longer exist. The actual available capacity now varies daily with the lake's elevation. When the head drops, the turbines derate. The grid dispatch has to adjust in real time. Power that planners assumed would be there simply is not. And because Hoover Dam is a cornerstone of the Western grid, that gap ripples outward. Utilities that depend on Hoover power have to find replacement generation. That usually means firing up natural gas plants or pulling power from other sources, which increases costs and emissions. The dam's decline does not just affect the dam. It destabilizes the entire regional power system that was built around the assumption that Hoover would always deliver. The system also shows that climate adaptation at major dams is not just about changing water release schedules or managing reservoir levels. It requires entirely new heavy machinery. It requires ripping out turbines that weigh hundreds of tons and installing replacements with completely different geometries. It requires shutdowns, crane work, precision machining, and years of planning. And it requires doing all of that while keeping enough units online to avoid grid blackouts. The logistical complexity is staggering, and the cost is only the beginning. You, the viewer, should watch the lake elevation and the turbine replacement schedule together. If Lake Mead continues to hover near the 1,035-foot danger zone, watch how many of the old units get pulled offline for cavitation damage. Watch how long the outages last. Watch whether the wide-head turbines actually preserve output at lower elevations, or whether the efficiency losses compound faster than the upgrades can compensate. And watch the gap between what Hoover Dam is supposed to produce and what it actually delivers to the grid. That gap is the clearest measure of how far the system has already shifted away from the assumptions it was built on. The funding, the turbine replacement, the cavitation risk, the lake decline, and the widening gap between nameplate identity and real low-water performance all belong to the same adaptation story. They all point to the same underlying shift. Hoover Dam is no longer operating in the hydrological system it was designed for. It is operating in a new system where the primary constraint on power generation is turbine geometry, just as much as water volume, and where success is no longer defined as powering endless expansion, but as simply keeping the grid stable during a drought. So here is the answer to the question from the beginning. This is how 52 million people get cut off. As Lake Mead drops toward the 1,035-foot threshold, The old turbines either destroy themselves through cavitation or get derated so severely that the power output collapses. And because Hoover Dam anchors the electricity and water management infrastructure that serves the entire Southwest, the loss of that baseline generation cascades into grid instability, higher costs, and the failure of systems that were never built to operate without Hoover running near capacity. That is not a projection. That is the system working exactly as it is currently built. Hoover Dam is not dead yet. But that is the point. The crisis is not in a dam that has failed. The crisis is in a dam that still looks like a monument from the outside, while its internal machinery is being quietly redesigned to survive a lake that no longer supports the turbine fleet it was born with. The 52 million people who depend on this infrastructure do not see the mechanism. They see the surface. Now you do.